I'm sure that most of you are probably familiar with the old saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure, right? I don't know that that's ever more evident than in that television show, American Pickers. Any of you fans of the show, American Pickers? Anybody besides my kids and me watch that? You know, I really, a few of you do. I really enjoy the show. I'm not much of a collector of things. I'm not really into antiques and all that sort of stuff. But I really do get a kick out of the stuff that Frank and Mike dig out of these old farms and barns and abandoned buildings, and how they assess value to things. In fact, a lot of the stuff that they dig out, we would look at and we would say it just simply looks like trash. It's garbage. A lot of the things that they pull out are broken or missing parts, and yet they look at it and they know that someone somewhere is going to assess some level of value for whatever it is that they're digging out. And what's really funny is how often they'll pull out things that look like they're just complete rubbish, and they can't even offer enough money to the person who owns it to part with it. You know, they'll offer large sums of money for something that looks like utter and complete trash, and yet the owner will not take the money for it. My wife came home from Value Village a couple of weeks ago with all jazzed up about this box of Christmas ornaments that she had purchased at Value Village. Now, she paid, I think, $3 for this. I think that's what the price tag, the Value Village, $3.99. She paid $3.99 at Value Village for this box of Christmas ornaments. Now, this thing's pretty old, and it actually still has the original Sears price tag on it. Originally, this was $6.99. So that's a pretty good deal. Even if you just look at it that way, that what was originally $6.99, she paid $3.99 for, that's a good deal. However, Elizabeth was more jazzed up for the fact that she considered these Christmas ornaments to be vintage Christmas ornaments. And since they're vintage ornaments, they're worth a whole lot more than $3.99. They're worth a whole lot than $6.99. Now, I'm not really sure. We might have to call Frank and Mike in on this to give us a real assessment of their value. But here's what I got thinking about. When we call something vintage, we're saying that it's old. There's no doubt that these guys are old, but we're also saying that they are of superior quality and therefore have a high value. Now, I really don't know about the quality of these things, but I got to thinking about how it is that how we ascribe worth or value to things that we see as being valuable. I watch this show all the time, American Pickers. There's a Canadian version called Canadian Pickers, two guys out of Calgary that go and rummage through people's junk and then offer them sums of money for it, things that they think that they can resell and make money on. And I think, how is it that we assess worth or ascribe worth to something? What's the difference between perceived value of something and actual value? How do we actually measure it? Now, in this teaching series, which we are wrapping up today, Vintage Christmas, what we've been doing is we've been looking at vintage characteristics of God. We looked at the first week of our series. We looked at God's compassion, God's vintage compassion. His characteristics are as old as eternity. So for sure, they're old, and they're also of superior quality. So we can clearly see that God's characteristics are vintage. So his vintage compassion is what we looked at in the first week of the series. Last week, we looked at God's vintage glory. And today, what we're going to be doing is looking at God's vintage value, the value that we might ascribe to God. We're going to examine just what God might be worth to us. We're going to look at the difference between perceived value and actual value. We need to kind of get beyond the surface level of what we say we value about God and kind of dig in deep and see what is the actual value. What I want to do before we jump into the text that we're going to be reading from the Bible this morning is just pray and ask God to lead us as we explore the words from the Bible. Would you bow and pray with me? God, I just want to thank you so much that you've preserved these words that we call the Bible thousands of years so that we could know your story, so that we could know your heart. And I just ask, Heavenly Father, that you would just come into this space right now through the power of your Holy Spirit and touch us, lead us, guide us as we explore the words from the Bible. I pray, Heavenly Father, that as I communicate what you put on my heart to share here today, that you would just let me kind of get out of the way, and that you would just let the truth about who you are be revealed in its most pure form. And we just ask all of this in your name, Jesus. Amen. So over the course of the last couple of weeks, we've looked at different components of the Christmas story. And at this particular stage in time, as we're going to be reading today, Jesus, the baby to Mary and Joseph, has already been born in a manger in Bethlehem. He's been visited by some angels. And we're actually kind of fast forwarding to what's probably a number of months after Jesus has been born. And we're going to look at some characters that often show up in your nativity scenes at home who weren't actually at the original nativity, although they are a part of the Christmas story. We're going to look today at the appearance of the men that we refer to as the wise men. We're going to begin reading this morning from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from the eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law, and he asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you, who will be the shepherd for my people." Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men. He learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child. And when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too." After this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. When it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. So let me start by telling you what we know about these three kings of Orient are. What we just read, that's all we know. That's all the information that we have about these guys who are always in your nativity scene. Now, a couple of things that we do know. One is that they came from the east. The second thing is we know that they were not kings, but they were wise men, or they were part of a court, maybe advisory court to the king of the land where they came from. We don't even know if there were three. Tradition sort of prompts us to see three whenever we draw the pictures or we put out our nativity scene, because there were three gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But there's a very good chance that there were more. The text just says that there were some men from the east. It doesn't tell us how many there were. There was probably a fairly good entourage in this group. Now, we don't know exactly where they came from, but it's assumed that they probably came from the area of Mesopotamia or ancient Babylon. And we do know that the Israelites, a number of them, had actually been to that part of the world, to what we would consider the East. We know that Daniel was there. We know that his buddies Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego were there. We read about them in the Old Testament. We know that the tribes of Israel were actually in exile, in captivity in Babylon. And our best laid guess as to why these guys from the east, some 500 miles away from Bethlehem, saw this star in the sky and decided it was something they needed to pursue, was that they had likely either read the book of Daniel, which is a part of our Old Testament today, or they had heard the oral traditions from the Israelite people when they had been in captivity in Babylon, and they knew of all these prophecies of a future king or a Messiah who was going to come. Whatever the case is, there's no doubt that when they see this amazing astronomical event happening, this great star shining in the sky, they know that something supernatural is happening, and so they need to pursue it. They see it as something that needs to be investigated. I'm not exactly sure why Matthew, this gospel writer, this friend of Jesus, decided it was important to include this little side note about these wise men from the East. I'm wondering if what Matthew was trying to show us was not so much who came to visit the baby Jesus after he was born, but more as to highlight who didn't come to worship the baby Jesus when he was born. These men from the East were definitely not the only ones who would have seen this big star in the sky, right? This star is still shining in the sky, still hanging in the heavens months after Jesus has been born. And these guys who were from 500 miles away, they weren't the only ones who could have seen it. Surely the people right there in the very neighborhood of where Jesus was born in Bethlehem would have seen it as well. Yet, we don't have a whole lot of evidence that those locals went to visit this baby who's been born. Let me show you a little bit of what I'm talking about. If we look at verse 3, it says that King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. I'm going to pause right there for just a second. King Herod was disturbed when he heard that there was a new king coming, because King Herod wasn't really a king. King Herod wasn't even really Jewish. He was half Jewish. He wasn't really a king of the Israelites. What he had done is he'd used political means with the Roman government to get himself set up as the king of the Jews. The Jewish people, the Israelites, they did not recognize him as their king, although the Roman government had given him some level of authority over them. And so when he hears that there's perhaps a real king that has been born, a real king of Israel, this obviously makes him very nervous. The text also tells us that everyone else in Jerusalem was deeply disturbed. And the reason that everyone else is disturbed is because King Herod himself is disturbed. Because King Herod was disturbed. He was a violent man, a crazy man. He was a paranoid man. He had actually already killed countless numbers of people, including many of his own family members, when he perceived that there was a threat to his authority. So needless to say, the people of Jerusalem, they get word that King Herod is disturbed about the birth of this king, and that's going to make them worry about how he's going to react. If we continued to read the Christmas story, what we would see is that King Herod does, in fact, he issues an order of infanticide and has many baby boys killed in an effort to try to snuff out Jesus, this new king. Now, Joseph and Mary had been given a warning from God, and they had fled, so Jesus was safe. But King Herod was a very violent, very disturbed man. And so what he does here is he calls a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asks, where is the Messiah supposed to be born? In Bethlehem, in Judea, they say. Now, Herod, the king, he calls in basically the top religious leaders in Jerusalem. He brings in the best theologians, the ones who are going to be the most well-versed in understanding God's promised Messiah. And he asks them the question, hey, where's the king? Where's the Messiah supposed to be born? And they, without hesitation, said Bethlehem. The king's going to come from Bethlehem. Messiah's coming from Bethlehem. These guys knew it. They had it right up here in their heads. They didn't have to pull out their YouVersion app and do a quick little search. They didn't have to hop online and check Wikipedia to know where the Messiah was going to come from. They knew, because they were experts in the law and the prophets. They were experts in understanding the prophecies. And so this is what I want you to note. These men from the East, who knew so little about what was happening in Bethlehem, took what little they knew and it moved them. It moved them to get on their camels or get on their donkeys or whatever it was that they were going to ride on this cross-continental desert journey to go and investigate this potential fulfillment of a prophecy. But those who were experts in the law, the ones who knew all about the prophets, the ones who knew every promise that God had made and all the prophecies about the coming Messiah, they were just a few kilometers away from where all the action was taking place, and they went nowhere. They were unmoved. I was listening to Matt Chandler's Advent teaching series from 2014. I was running on the track at the Y. That's when I often, I'll listen to sermons or podcasts or whatever when I'm running on the track. And I'm running around the track, and he kind of gets to this part of the story, and all of a sudden it was like God hit me at the side of the head with a 2x4. I stopped running. Something became crystally clear to me in this moment as I thought about these wise men from the East, and in contrast, these experts in the law. And here's what I stopped and I texted myself so I didn't forget it. There's a big difference between knowing and going. There's a big difference between knowing and going. See, right there in the epicenter of the Jewish religious world was a community of people who were dedicated to studying the ancient scriptures and knowing and following God's laws, understanding and anticipating all of God's promises. And yet right there under their noses, the Messiah shows up and they completely missed it. These are the people who were supposed to be closest to God. Yet when God showed up right there in their neighborhood, they had their heads down and they completely missed it. When the light bulb went on for me as I studied this and I began to sort of flesh this out for myself, I got really excited because I love it when God reveals something to me in a story, especially one like the Christmas story that I've read so many times, and it's kind of something new that I can sort of apply and something that I could teach. And so I got excited about it. But at the same time, as I was getting excited about it, I actually started to get a little bit frustrated, a little bit discouraged. Because what I realized is that this description of these experts of the law describes so many people that I know who call themselves Christians. Maybe it even describes some of you. See, there's a premium in our culture today that we place on what we know. There's a premium in our Western church culture on how biblically literate we are. How much we've stored up here, how many verses we've memorized, how much we know about the end times, and how well we understand these complicated books like the book of Revelation. There's a lot of emphasis placed on that, but here's what we need to realize, is that if what we know doesn't motivate us to go, then what we know is useless. If what we know doesn't motivate us to go, then what we know is completely useless. For whatever reason, and I'm not sure what it was, these wise men saw extraordinary value in the fulfillment of God's promise to send a Messiah. They saw so much value in it that it was worth leaving their homes. It was worth risking their lives. It was worth giving extravagant gifts to come to this king, this newborn baby, and to worship him and to make an offering. These weren't any Joe Schmoes off the street. These weren't guys that were down on their luck looking for a leg up. These were some of the most elite people in their community. They were important people. They were people of influence, people of leadership, people of wealth and status. It reminds me of one of Jesus' parables. It's actually one of his shortest parables. Matthew records it in his gospel in chapter 13, where Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered hidden in a field. In his excitement, he hid it again and sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy the field. You see, when we come across something that we deem as being of great value, we will go to great measures to attain it. We're willing to give up a lot, make great sacrifices of one thing to attain something that we deem as being of great value or great worth, to get it, to hold on to it, to preserve it. And herein lies a very important test for all of us. You see, there are a lot of things in our life that we strive for. We strive for wealth. We strive for relationships. We strive for position at work. We strive for health and being healthy. We strive for being good looking. There's nothing wrong with striving for those things as long as we realize that at some point in time we're going to lose every one of those things. None of those things will last forever. So when we start measuring what they are worth to us or what their value is to us, we need to hold it in comparison to how much we value our relationship with God. Because see, our relationship with God through Jesus will never go away. It will never be taken from us. It is eternal. It will last forever. I don't know about you, but when I start to process the promise of hope, salvation, that God has made for those who have placed our lives in Jesus' hands, those of us who have committed our lives to following him, those of us who have said, Jesus, you're going to be my North Star, and I'm going to let you be the guiding light of my life. This hope, the salvation, the peace, the freedom that we experience in that, to me, is priceless. As Jesus said, it's the treasure in the field that makes worth giving everything else up in order to attain. And so the question becomes, if we see value, true value in who Jesus is, the life that he offers, the hope that we have in him, the freedom that we attain by the virtue of his death and resurrection, why doesn't what we know more often motivate us to go? If we know it, we say it, why do we so often fail to live it? we've got to be careful to not live our lives like those religious leaders of Jesus' day. Heads down, focused on what we think we need to know. Because when our heads are down, we might miss what God's doing right in front of our very eyes. All those guys needed to do was look up. If they just looked up, they would have reconciled what God had already revealed to them through the scriptures and what they knew, what they had stored up here. And they would have reconciled that God was showing them something that connected with that. It would have brought the whole thing to life for them, and they completely missed it. And I don't want you to miss what God might be doing right in front of your very eyes. You know, we're kind of making our way through the holidays right now, and all of us, to some degree, have our heads down. We're racing around trying to check off the last few gifts that we need to buy at the mall or Walmart. We're trying to plan the meals and make sure that everybody's coming to visit has a bed to sleep in. We've got our heads down. But as we race around this holiday season, it is critically important that we take opportunities to look up, to see what God might be doing in our lives right in front of us. At the start of our time today, I posed this question: what's the difference between the perceived value of something and actual value? How do we measure it? And here's what I believe. I believe that we measure the value, the actual value, not the perceived value, but the actual value of something based on what we're willing to give up to attain it and how far we're willing to go to get it. It's clear to me that when I see the story of the wise men and compare it to the religious leaders of Jesus' day, that the wise men, for whatever reason, saw greater value in what God was doing in fulfilling this promise than those who were right there in the neighborhood. Saying that something has value to us means nothing unless it's backed up by a willingness to give something up in order to attain it. We've got to make sacrifices to take what we believe to have value. When we know that something is valuable, then we need to go. And if we don't go to attain it, if we don't go to take hold of it, to preserve it, then all we're doing is giving lip service. It means nothing. Now, you might have found it a little bit odd that we did so little music at the beginning of our service time today. Those of you who've been around for any length of time probably recognize that as whenever we do little music at the beginning, it means that I have a really long sermon to preach. And so some of you got a little bit nervous about that. But that's not the case today. In fact, what I wanted to do was actually deliver a fairly compact message for you today. And then I wanted to spend some time worshiping after. And here's why. When we sing songs at Grasslands, what we're doing is we are worshiping. The word worship means to ascribe worth to something. When we sing songs to God, when we sing songs about and to Jesus, what we're doing is we're saying, God, you have value to us. You are worthy of our praise. And when we worship, what worship should be is it should be a response to our encounter with God. When we have a personal encounter with God and we just realize how amazing He is, how glorious He is, and we recognize what His value is, what He's worth to us, then that should move us to worship. And so today, as we wrap things up this morning, we're going to spend some time singing. I wanted to deliver a fairly concise message for you here and then spend 10 or 15 minutes actually worshiping, singing songs in response to our encounter with God. Now, there are a variety of different ways that you might be moved to respond to God today as we sing. I'll give you a few suggestions, but really this is a personal thing for you. One of the things that you might need to do as we sing this morning is you might just need to sit there and pray. Maybe there's something on your heart that you need to give over to God today. Maybe there's some sin, some struggle, something that you're wrestling with in your life that you need to take time this morning and just say, God, I recognize that I can't get through this. I can't get over this. I can't get past this without you. I need to just give this over to you. Maybe there is some sin that is holding you in bondage and you are really wrestling with it and you just need to say, Jesus, I know that you can break the chains of this bondage and I need to give that over to you today. Maybe your response to Jesus, to God today as we worship is maybe you need to take the next step in your faith journey. Whatever that might be for you. For some of you, your next step might be to get baptized. For a lot of you, your next step is to get baptized. And it takes a sacrifice. I recognize it takes a lot of humility. We have to give up a little bit of our pride to be willing to get into water and get our head dunked to say, I follow Jesus in public. It is a sacrifice. But if Jesus is valuable to you, if you say that you value who he is, would you respond to him in worship today by saying, yes, I'm going to get baptized. I'm going to take that next step in my faith journey. Maybe the next step for you is to say, you know what, I'm going to commit to actually attending church services a little bit more than once or twice a year or once a month or however often it is that you do or do not hang out with us here on Sundays. Maybe you need to say, God, you are worth enough to me that I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of my sleep-in time on Sunday morning and I'm going to come and spend time with you and your people at the movie theater. Maybe your next step is to get connected into a community group and say, I'm going to give up my Monday night or I'm going to give up my Thursday night. I'm going to stop, sitting and watching Netflix every Thursday night and I'm going to get into a community of people who can help me grow in my relationship with you, God. That's my response to you. That is my worship to you. That is my commitment. Some of you just need to say yes to Jesus for the very first time. Maybe the glory of God has shown you your need for him. And you've been exposed for who you are and you recognize that you are not where you need to be and you just need to say, yes, Jesus, I'm going to let you be the leader of my life. I'm going to let you be the North Star of my life. Some of you just need to sing your hearts out. You just need to use the breath that God's given you, that he's put in your lungs and the vocal cords that he's given you, and you just need to sing. You should just sing and tell him, God, I'm so grateful for what you've done and who you are and what you're doing in my life, and just sing and tell him. Now, there's one more miracle that we see in this Christmas story that doesn't often get a lot of airplay. And I want to see if you actually noticed it as we read it. Did anyone notice that there were a group of men who came from the east, traveled 500 miles to Jerusalem, and stopped and asked for directions? Is that a miracle or what? Because guys don't do that, right? Guys are like, these guys, they stopped. They're like, well, we're not quite sure where we're supposed to be. We thought we were headed in the right direction, but can you point us in the right direction? But most guys are kind of like, I recognize this. I'm sure that if we just keep going a little bit further, I'll know exactly where we're supposed to go. And we keep driving and we go round and round in circles, right? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but I know most of us are like, that's a Christmas miracle. These guys stopped and asked for directions. Now, the reason I highlight this for you this morning is that some of you have been driving around spiritually in circles for a really long time. You're really not sure if you are saved or not. You're really not sure if you have what we call a relationship with God. You don't even really know for sure what it means to follow Jesus. You think you're headed in the right direction and you keep thinking, well, if I just keep going down this road long enough, I'll eventually recognize where I'm supposed to turn, where I'm supposed to get off. But you're not. You're lost. You're traveling in circles. And so what I want to ask you to do today, maybe this is your response to God as we worship, is to say, okay, I'm going to stop and ask for directions. I'm going to take out the Connect card that I got in my bulletin this morning, or maybe the one that's in the cup holder sitting in your seats. You notice they're full of Connect cards this morning. And you take that Connect card out and you say, I need direction. I need help. I need to know what it means to follow Jesus. I need to understand better why I should get baptized. I need to understand how I fit into God's plans for the church. I need help. I need direction. Swallow a little bit of your pride. Make that sacrifice today and say, God, you're worth it for me to stop and ask for directions. Some of you are like the wise men who were very far away from Jesus at the beginning of their journey. You know that there's something you need to pursue. You see the light and it's out there and you know that there's something to it. But you're not 100% sure what you're actually chasing. Those men from the east, they didn't know what they were going to find. I think the reason they went to the palace in Jerusalem, to Herod's palace, is because they just assumed that this is where babies, like baby kings, are born in palaces, right? They weren't expecting him to be living in some pauper's house in Bethlehem, a little village out in the middle of nowhere. And some of you are on that journey where you're like, I see the light. I know I'm supposed to be going in this direction, but I'm just not sure how to get where I'm supposed to be. Would you ask for help today? Would you ask for direction? Would you take your Connect card out today and say, I just need help. I need to know where I need to go. I want to go. I think I know. I need to go. However you're going to respond to God today as we worship, I want to encourage you to use that Connect card. Fill it out. You know what? The truth is, a little secret you didn't know, but now you're going to know, is if you want to get baptized, you don't even need to fill out the Connect card today because we've already got a hot tub being warmed up right now, and we can go do it this afternoon. No joke. If you want to get baptized, if you want to make that public declaration of your faith today, we'll do it right after the service. We'll go grab a bite to eat. Okay, we'll go grab a bite to eat, then we'll go get in the water, and we'll baptize you today, and you can say yes to Jesus. And wouldn't this be a monumental Christmas for you to be able to do that? To say this was the season, this was the Christmas season that I finally took that step of faith and responded to God. Whatever it is that you want to do, however it is that you want to respond to God today, use your Connect card and let us know. We're going to have a time at the end of the service today. We're going to collect those from you. Now, before we sing, as you respond, here's one thing I want you to realize. That this is not some little happy birthday Jesus moment for us. That's not what Christmas is. I mean, I know some of you with your kids, you'll sing happy birthday Jesus. People will, you'll bake a cake. You'll do those kinds of things. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But we need to recognize that the magnitude of the moment is much greater than just happy birthday Jesus. And so what I want to do before we sing is I want to read to you a description of this baby lying in the manger that was written by the Apostle Paul and recorded in the book of Colossians. This is a description of the baby Jesus, the one in the manger. He is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. For through him, the one in the manger, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things we can see and the things we can't see, such as thrones, kingdoms, rulers, and authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through him, the baby in the manger, and for him, the baby in the manger. He, that one that lies there, existed before anything else. And he, the one in the manger, holds all creation together. Would you stand as we sing together?